Today's daf is Pevav. We're going to start on Pehei Amud Bet, 3 lines up from the bottom. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Im Yesham Tefisat Yad. So this is the Mishnah. Mishnah says if the owner of a building has Tefisat Yad, in other words, let's say, for example, there's a landlord who has multiple tenants, and in the apartments that he rents out to these tenants, he reserves some storage. He stores some of his own stuff. He lets these people live there, but he stores his own stuff. So it's all considered one home. So if he owns, let's say, 10 houses in a courtyard, so normally, since each house is being rented by a different person, they would have to make Eruvei Chatzerot. The only thing is, since he stores his own stuff in each one of these houses, they're all considered his house, and we don't look at it as multiple houses. It's all looked at as one house, and so it doesn't require Eruvei Chatzerot. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said. Now, the Gemara starts out by telling us it starts out by giving an example. Hechi damei tefisat yad. What's an example of somebody who has tefisat yad, who has control over their property? So it says, Chatzerosh kegon chatzerosh shel Bunyas ben Bunyas. Bunyas ben Bunyas was a wealthy landlord, and he owned. Rashi says, Ashirava. He was a rich man. Umashil batim shebachatzer lachirim. He used to lend out his homes to other people to stay in. In other words, he had so many houses, he would let people stay in his houses. So it says, he was so rich, he had so much stuff, so all of these houses contained his stuff. But he would let people stay there. So that's an example of somebody who has tefisat yad. He maintains control over the properties and usage of the properties even when he rents them out. So we have a story about him now. So one time, this Bunyas ben Bunyas came in front of Rabbi. He came in front of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and Amar lo, he said to everybody, "Penu makom leben meyam maneh." Open up a place, clear a place for somebody who has 100 maneh, meaning for somebody who's wealthy. Give him some respect. Ata inish achrina amar lahu, "Penu makom leben matayim maneh." Somebody else came and he said, open a space for somebody of 200 maneh, meaning it's like saying, here, first is a millionaire, now is a billionaire, right? So Bunyas ben Bunyas was the second on the list. He wasn't the top of the list. Amar lefanav, Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yosei. Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yosei said to his teacher, Rabbi, Aviv shel zeh yesh lo 1,000 sfinot bayam. The father of this person that you said only had 100, not 200, his father has 1,000 boats on the sea. Ukenegdan 1,000 ayarot bayabasha, and he owns 1,000 cities on the land. In other words, you thought that person was less wealthy. You thought he was wealthy, but not on the level that of the second guy. But actually, the first guy is like a billionaire. Amar lo, he said to him, Amorlo, when you see the father of this guy, tell him, don't send him dressed poorly in front of me. In other words, he says, if you're wealthy, you have to dress the part. Otherwise, I don't know. I knew that he looked well-to-do, but he didn't look that wealthy, so I didn't know. He has to, when he leaves the house, he has to dress according to his social status. Rabbi mechabed ashirim. Rabbi Akiva mechabed ashirim. Rabbi used to respect wealthy people. By the way, Rabbi himself was very wealthy. Rabbi Akiva also respected wealthy people. And Rabbi Akiva wasn't wealthy when he started out. He was very poor, but he became wealthy later in life. Kididarash Rava Bar Mari. It's like Rava Bar Mari said, learned out from the pasuk, Yeshev olam lifnei Elohim, chesed ve'emet man yintzeru. So it says that the world will be settled before Hashem. Kindness and truth will protect it. Okay, will guard it. When does the world remain settled before Hashem? At a time when there's somebody to provide kindness and truth. In other words, when there are wealthy people who give tzedakah. Who holds up the world? The people who give tzedakah. If there's no philanthropists, the world wouldn't go on. So you need people to take care of those less fortunate and to support the causes that require tzedakah. So the Rashi says the word man here in the pasuk, when it says man yinsruhu, who guards the sustenance, man is sustenance. Okay, they're the ones who make sure that there's sustenance around. Is the people who do chesed, the people who do kindness for others. So the Rabba Bar Chana says, what's the definition of tefisat yad? We said, if the owner of the place keeps some of his stuff on the premises, it's not considered to belong to the tenant. It's still considered to belong to the landlord. What does he have to leave there? Kegon yatid shel maharesha. Like even the pin that holds the plow together. The plow would be, there was like a peg that held the plow together. Even that is enough. He just has to have one thing that he leaves in the house that belongs to him, and it's still considered his place. Amar Rav Nachman said, Tana Shmuel, the yeshiva of Shmuel taught, Davar nital b'Shabbat oser, Davar she'eno nital b'Shabbat eno oser. That if it's something which can be moved on Shabbat, it doesn't count. Why? Because let's say this landlord leaves in the apartments food, so he could come take it out on Shabbat. And then what will happen? There'll be nothing in the apartment that belongs to him. And then what will happen? Each of these apartments is now considered a separate dwelling. When he has something on the premises, it's his dwelling. And they're all, even if he has 100 houses, they're all his dwelling. But if he leaves something there, if he takes whatever belongs to him out, so then it loses that status. And now let's say he has 100 tenants. Each house has a tenant. So now it's going to be considered 100 different households instead of one. But he has to leave something there that can't be removed on Shabbat. Because if it's something that's not muktzeh, that could be removed on Shabbat, so then it's contingent. It's not absolute. And Tanya Ram Yachi, we also learned in a Braita, that as long as the landlord, let's say you have 10 houses in the courtyard, and they would normally have to make an Eruvin Chatzerot because each person living in each one of the houses is a different person. But since they're all owned by one landlord, we say, if the landlord put tevel, untithed produce is muktzeh because you can't use it, you can't eat it. Or he left steel bars in the houses. Steel bars, again, are used for construction, so they're muktzeh. Muktzeh things he can't move. So the fact that he left them there means he has a presence in each one of the houses on Shabbat that's not going to change because he can't move those items on Shabbat. So that's why we say all 10 houses are really his house, and we don't look at it as 10 houses, we look at it as one.
These days, the landlord has a refrigerator and rent you that couch.
Some people use this idea to say, well, in a hotel, let's say in a hotel, for example, they have that fridge that has, all the food in it that they're selling, that they want you to buy. It's not yours. And on Shabbat, you can't, but they could come take it if they wanted to, right? So it's a question whether it really counts or not. You could say, since they could take almost all those things out, maybe it doesn't count as one. Maybe it doesn't count as tfisat yad on Shabbat. But that's brought as an example. They say, a landlord in a building, they usually leave some stuff in the different places that belongs to the fixtures, whatever belongs to them, or in the in the hotel rooms. So it's a question. They bring up this as an example. The Mishnah says, we've seen this case before earlier in the Masekhet. Somebody lives in a courtyard. Let's say there's 5 houses in the courtyard. One of the people leaves for Shabbat. So what's the status of the person who leaves? Do they have to participate in the Eruvin Chatzerot? Do we not count them because they're gone for Shabbat? What do we do? So, Ehad Nochri ve'Ehad Yisrael Harizeh Oser de Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says it doesn't matter if you're actually there on Shabbat or not. You live there, right? You live in the courtyard, so you're not there for one Shabbat. That doesn't mean that you don't live there. So you still have to participate in the Eruvin Chatzerot, and if you don't, you're going to ruin it for everybody, even though you're not there. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Eino Oser. Rabbi Yehuda says no. If you're not there, it doesn't count. Rabbi Yosef Omer, Rabbi Yosef says, Nochri Oser Yisrael and Oser. Rabbi Yosef says, a non-Jew, even if he's not there, still counts. A Jew doesn't count. Why? Because if the non-Jew is gone on Shabbat, he can come on Saturday. He doesn't have to keep Shabbat. So even though he's gone now, we can't depend on it. Maybe he'll show up on Shabbat. But the Jew, if he goes away for Shabbat, he's gone. At least we know he's gone for that Shabbat. Why? He says, because it's not normal for the Jew to show up on Shabbat. So we consider him out of the picture for that Shabbat. So Rashi says that he also holds that when you're not there, it doesn't count. The only thing is, with the non-Jew, we're worried maybe he's going to show up on Shabbat. Right? That's the rule. And then finally, Rabbi Shimon Omer, even if you left your house and you went to another house in the same city, you went to stay with your daughter in the next chatzer, it doesn't matter. And even though you could walk back, you're not going to come back. We assume you're not going to come back. We still say, as soon as you go to stay at somebody else's house for Shabbat, that's it. We don't think you're going to come back. So he's saying the most lenient. He's saying if you leave for Shabbat, that's it, you're gone. Even if you're right next door, even if you're in the next chatzer, you're not in your chatzer, we don't assume you're going to come back. The Gemara says, Amar Rav says, Halakha Rabbi Shimon, we follow Rabbi Shimon. That even if you're in the next chatzer over, so we have two extreme opinions. We have the opinion that says that whether you're there or not, you're considered to be a resident of the chatzer and you're responsible for Eruvei Chatzerot. We had Rabbi Yossi who said if you're not there, out of sight, out of mind. You're gone. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yehuda said out of sight, out of mind. Rabbi Yossi said basically if you're out, you don't count. The only thing is, if it's a non-Jew, he might show up. Rabbi Shimon says, even with a Jew, even if he's in the next chatzer, we still say he's not going to come back. So he said we follow that as the halacha, but only if you go to your daughter's house. Why? Because aval bitolo, but if you go to your son's house, we're afraid you might come back home. Why? Funny reason, because the Gemara says the amrei enashe, because people say nabach bach kalba ul nabach ba guriyata puk. Okay, what does that mean? It means if you have a fight, right, with a dog. Okay, if you have a fight with a dog, what are you going to do? It says if he bites you, okay. So then what you're going to it says then you're going to go in. Okay, but if you have a fight with a female goriyata, you have a fight with a female lion, you're going to get out. So what it means is you go to your daughter's house. What's going to happen? You have a fight with your son-in-law. You ignore him. He bites, you ignore him. But you go to your son's house, and the daughter-in-law gives you a hard time. That's it. You're going to go home, right? No, nobody can fight with the woman of the house. Okay, you have tensions with the daughter-in-law. It's not going to be good. You have tensions with the son-in-law. You'll just ignore each other. But with the daughter-in-law, you won't be able to survive. You're going to come home. So if you're at your son's house and he's married, we're worried maybe you're going to come home on Shabbat because you'll have a fight with the daughter-in-law. You're with the daughter. We're not worried. Next Mishnah says, Borshe ben shte chatzerot. Let's say you have a cistern of water between two chatzerot. So in other words, there's a wall. The cistern is under the wall. The wall separates the two chatzerot, and there is a cistern of water underneath. So what happens? Half of it is on your side, your chatzer. Half of it is on the other chatzer. So what happens is, you have to make a 10 tefach wall in the middle of this cistern. Why? To show that this is our side and this is your side. Because these two chatzerot didn't join together. So you can't carry from that chatzer to your chatzer, or from your chatzer to that chatzer. So what do? You want to both use the water, but it's a shared space between the two chatzerot, and you didn't join with the other chatzer. So what are you going to do? You have to make a wall in the middle of the cistern and say, okay, the right side of the cistern, that water belongs to the people on the right side chatzer. The left side of the cistern, that belongs to people on the left. Ben milmata ben mitoch ogno. It either has to be below. And we'll see what this means. We'll see more in the Gemara. It either has to be below, or it has to be mitoch ogno, inside the lip of the cistern. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Bet Shammai omri milemata, Bet Hillel omri milemala. That Bet Shammai says that it has to be below, and Bet Hillel says it could be above. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda says, this whole discussion is a waste of time. Because there's already a wall dividing the two chatzerot. What do you need a wall inside the cistern? It's enough, the wall that you have, already dividing the two chatzerot. However, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel say, you need a wall. And the Tanakama said it could be a wall below or a wall within the lip of the cistern. We'll see what that means. We'll look at a picture. Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai argue. Beit Hillel says the wall can be above. Beit Shammai says below. So we're going to take a look. Let's see, they have a picture here. Hold on. They have in the art scroll. Oh, in there. In the Steinsalv, it's a picture. So let's take a look. Yeah, so you could see here, hold on. Here in illustration 291, it shows you the wall that they would make in a cistern. The cistern goes over two chatzerot, okay? And on this one, the next page, illustration 292, it shows you what is the ogno. Inside the lip of the cistern means that the cistern has walls. The water doesn't start until down here, even though there are walls of the cistern up here. So Beit Hillel is saying you can put the wall up here. It doesn't have to be touching the water. Beit Shammai says it has to be right at the level of the water. Okay? And we're going to see there's another opinion that says that no, Beit Hillel says it has to be at the level of the water, and Beit Shammai actually says it has to be at the floor of the cistern. In the water. Okay, so we're going to see now how that plays out. The inside of the lip of the part that's dry in the cistern, like if you fill up a cup and you just fill the bottom, so the top is still dry, the dry part that doesn't have any water, you can put your fingers in there. Then the bottom has the water. So the cistern is the same. There's a part that's just walls, and then at a certain point the water starts inside the cistern. So the Gemara says, Amar Ravuna says, Lemata mamash lemala mamash, v'zeh babor. Okay, that he means above means actually above, and below means actually below. In other words, he says that Beit Hillel is saying above means even from the top of the cistern you can put the wall. It doesn't have to be anywhere near the water level. And Beit Shammai says it has to be at the water level. In other words, they don't have to be in the water, but Beit Shammai says it has to be at least at the water level. And Beit Hillel is saying it could be even at the top of the cistern, this dividing wall. However,
cisterns are not natural.
They could be, but it's probably talking about a natural one. Yeah, as you draw water, it goes down. According to Rav Yehuda, the machloket here is not whether the wall has to be above, it's not within the airspace of the cistern, but relative to the water. According to Beit Hillel, the wall has to be at the water level, above the water, and according to Beit Shammai, it has to be at the ground of the cistern, in the water. Okay? So that's the machloket. In other words, the machloket is whether we look at it as picture number 292 or picture number 293. According to picture 292, Beit Hillel is putting this wall at the top of the cistern, all the way up here. And Beit Shammai is putting the wall at the water level. According to the second view, Beit Hillel is putting the wall at the water level, and Beit Shammai is putting the wall in the water at the floor of the cistern. That's the question of where does this divider have to go? Amar le Rabbah Barav Hanan la Abaye. Rabbah Barav Hanan said to Abaye, Hada Amar Rav Yehuda lemata min hamayim, ma'ishina lemata mamash de arivei maya, lemata min hamayim nami arivei maya. So he said to him, wait a second. According to Rav Yehuda, that says that lemata means lemata min hamayim. Okay, that it means it has to be actually inside the water. So I have a question. What's the difference between that and having the wall at the water level? Because either way, if the concern here is the water is going to travel from side A to side B, we're dividing the cistern into two sides. Side A is for courtyard A, and side B is for courtyard B. But this wall, if you put it all the way at the bottom of the cistern, and it's only 10 tefachim high, we know that the water's passing over this wall anyway. So what difference does it make if we have a wall that hangs down and touches the water surface, You're saying that's not good enough according to Beit Shammai because the water will travel underneath the wall. Well, if you put the wall all the way in the bottom of the cistern, the water is going to travel over the wall. In both cases, the wall is not blocking the water. It's symbolic. So what's the difference between the two? Amarle said to him, Lo shemi alachad amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav. Did you not hear what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav? Matuba mishum Rav Yechia, and some attributed to Rav Yechia that tzarich sheyir'u sheyera'u roshan shel kanim le'mala min hamayim tefach. That according to Beit Shammai, actually, it's not enough that the wall be at the bottom of the cistern. It actually has to go all the way up past the water. In other words, this divider actually has to come up and protrude out from the water, like a real divider. It really divides the two sides. It comes all the way from the bottom of the cistern, a tefach past the water. That's what Beit Shammai is saying, according to Rav Yehuda. And Vitu, and furthermore, he asked him a question, Hadam Rav Yehuda lemala min hamayim. So you're also saying, according to Rav Yehuda, Beit Hillel says that the wall that we're creating to divide the cistern into two sides has to be up to the water. It comes from the top to the water level, but it doesn't have to actually go into the water. But wait a second. What's the difference? Now, again, you have the same thing. According to the first interpretation of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, both walls are symbolic because one wall is all the way at the top of the cistern and one wall is right above the water, but nobody says that the wall has to go in the water. However, according to Rav Yehuda's interpretation, Beit Shammai is saying that the wall has to actually go into the water. And Beit Hillel wouldn't allow you to put the wall at the top of the cistern. Even they say that the wall has to be it has to be at the water level. So we asked him, what's the difference, water level and all the way up top? All the way up top, it doesn't block the water. And at the water level, it doesn't block the water either, because we're not talking about a wall that actually goes into the water. We're just talking about a wall that the bottom of the wall is at the water level. The wall doesn't actually block any water. Right? It's in the airspace of the cistern, like this. So what is he accomplishing? What is the difference between whether I put this wall at the very top of the airspace of the cistern or right above the water? In both cases, they're not touching the water. So what difference does it make? He said to him, you didn't hear what Yaakov Karchina'a taught. That you need to immerse the edge of the boards into the water, a tefach. So in other words, according to this version of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai is saying that the wall has to come all the way from the bottom of the cistern and protrude out, a tefach past the water. And Beit Hillel says you have to lower the wall so that it protrudes a tefach into the water. So they're both agreeing that there has to be some actual division of the water. But what about the statement of Rav Yehuda? Rav Yehuda said that Korah, if you have a board that's 4 tefachim wide, it's materet b'churba. You can walk under that board in a ruin. So why? Because we view the board as the walls of the board descend down and create imaginary walls around you. The edges of the board descend down. Even though there's just a board going across, we look at it that walls are coming down and closing around you. And Rav Nachman said that Rav Baravua said, and we turn to Amud Bet Korah Arba'a Materet B'mayim, that if you have a 4 tefach wide board, it permits you to draw water. Now remember, we learned that this is talking about a case. Rashi says that babor sheben shte chatzerot untuna al rochba be'emtza bor lemala, that if you have a cistern in between 2 chatzerot, you can put a board of 4 tefachim wide across the middle of the bore, and then if I'm from Chatzer Bet, I could reach in and take water from my side, and you're from Chatzer Aleph, you can reach over and take water from your side. That works. So all you have is a board that goes across the top of the cistern, because we view the edge of the board as if it goes down and makes a wall. So now the question is, but why are we not concerned that when I put my bucket in on side 2, I'm on side 2, I put my bucket in, it's going to drift over to side 1. The water that I draw is going to come from side 1. So the answer is no. I'm sorry. Because we assume, the rabbis had an assumption that a deli, a bucket, is not going to travel that far. It's not going to drift 4 tefachim all the way under the board to the other side. But still, we have another problem. Because tachat kora ha'arive maya. What about the fact that water is going under this board? In other words, all you have is a flat board going across the surface of the water. Water that is on the left side is going to switch over to the right side. Water that's on the right side is going to switch over to the left side. The water is moving. There's nothing blocking one side from the other. It's not like you have a solid wall going down the middle. So why are we not worried about the water that goes from one side to the other? Rather, we say mishum dekalu shekilu chachamim. Because the rabbis were lenient about drawing water on Shabbat. They didn't want, since all of these halachot of chatzerot, everything about chatzerot is only rabbinic anyway, they didn't want to impose stringent rabbinic rules when it comes to drawing water on Shabbat. They were lenient. And that's why Beit Hillel says all you have to have is that the wall that descends down protrudes just a tefach into the water, just a hand's breadth of 3 inches into the water, or 4 inches, whatever it is. That's all you need. And even though the water is going back and forth underneath, we don't care. It's a symbolic gesture that our side is our side, your side is your side. But they didn't want to be so strict that they would require you to put a real wall in to separate the water for one half of the cistern from the other, because it's only a rabbinic rule and we're dealing with drawing water. They wanted to be lenient. Yeah, like Kedeba'a mine Rabbi Tavla Merav, like Rabbi Tavla asked Rav, Mechitzat Tluya Ma'ushet Tatir B'chorba. He asked him, can a Mechitzat Tluya work in a ruin? A ruin is a place where the walls are broken down, and you want to know there's a Mechitzat Tluya. Mechitzat Tluya means, let's imagine that the bottom of this wall is completely broken. There's nothing at the bottom. There's only the top half, and it doesn't come down all the way to within 3 tefachim of the ground. Okay, let's say there's 10 tefachim of wall, but it's elevated and it doesn't come down to the bottom. It's mechitzat tluya. So does that count as a wall? So he said to him, no. That usually a wall that's hanging down and doesn't reach the ground is not considered to be a wall, because somebody could go under it. You can go under it. It's not a wall. It doesn't block traffic. Except for water. When it came to enclosing a body of water so they could draw water on Shabbat, they were lenient. But when it comes to enclosing a ruin, which is actually a public area, they were not lenient. They did not allow mechitzat tluya. Yeah, they allow a gap of 3 tefachim, up to 3 tefachim. Right, if an animal can go up, it's gidayim bok imbo. If the sheep can go under, right, then it's no good. That's the general rule. And sukkah too, that's the rule. Okay, so now the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda lo te machita. So we said that, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, he says, you don't need any of this. Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, you don't need a special mechitza to divide the cistern. Why? Because there's a wall between the 2 chatzerot. I know that whatever on my wall of the chatzer is mine. Whatever's on the other wall, whatever's in the other chatzer is theirs. So the Gemara says that Amar Rabba bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabba bar Chana said that Rabbi Yochanan said, Rabbi Yehuda b'shitat Rabbi Yosei Amara, that Rabbi Yehuda is following the position of Rabbi Yosei. The Amar mechitzat tluya materet afilu bayabasha, because according to Rabbi Yosei, a mechitzat tluya, a hanging mechitza, works even on dry land, not just in water. And why is this mechitzat tluya? Because if you look at the way it's set up, the cistern is in a position where we have the wall of the courtyard is above the cistern. It doesn't reach down. It doesn't reach down to the cistern. This is the extra wall that they put in, but without that wall, all you would have is the wall of the chatzer. That's illustration number 291. All you have is the wall of the chatzer, and then there's a pit underneath the wall, basically, okay? So the wall doesn't reach down. So according to Rabbi Yosei, a mechitzat tluya is good. So Rabbi Yehuda is very lenient. He says, mechitzat tluya, we view the wall like as if it descends down. That's what he's saying. So the Gemara says, that's not as we learned in the Mishnah. This is from Sukkah. What's the rule in Sukkah? If you have a wall that starts from the ground and goes up, as long as it's 10 tefachim in height, it's good. Even if it doesn't reach the sechach. The sechach, it doesn't reach all the way up. But it's fine. However, if you're working from top down, you start from the schach and you start from the level where the schach will be, from the top, and you start sewing a wall down, and you don't reach the ground, there's 3 tefachim or more at the bottom, it's no good. That's what the Tanna Kama said. But Rabbi Yosei says that Rabbi Yosei Omer, Keshem milemata lemala asara, kach milemala lemata asara. That just like all you need is 10 tefachim when you're going from ground level up, the same when you're going from the top down. As long as you have a wall of 10 tefachim, we view it as if it descends to the bottom, even if there's a gap. And we could see, there's a picture of this as well, illustrated in the illustrations here, on page, illustration 296 and 297. So this is where you start from the bottom and you go to the top, okay? In 297, when you start from the top and you go to the bottom in 296, and you see the little sheep he's able to get under, the little goat, right? He's climbing under there. So what's the point? The point is, according to Rabbi Yosei, both are good, because once you have 10 tefachim of wall, we don't care that there's a gap at the bottom. And we're saying that's what Rabbi Yehuda said. That's why Rabbi Yehuda said that the wall of the chatzerot, the wall in between the chatzerot, is enough. You don't need to make a separate wall for the cistern. The cistern is underneath the wall of the chatzerot. We're just going to say the wall of the chatzerot descends down and closes it. Right. Well, no, this principle is called gud achit, which means the wall descends. Lavud is horizontal. Lavud is a horizontal plane, lateral, closing off. Gud achit means that something that goes down, we view it to close. Gud asik is that if something goes up, we view it to reach the top. Okay? So now the Gemara says, no. Velohi, it's not true that Rabbi Yehuda believes that Rabbi Yosei's position about Sukkah. Lo Rabbi Yehuda savar like Rabbi Yosef, lo Rabbi Yosef savar like Rabbi Yehuda. In fact, they completely disagree. Rabbi Yehuda would not agree with Rabbi Yosef about walls in general. He's only lenient about the cistern in between the 2 chatzerot, and Rabbi Yosef is only lenient about the wall of the sukkah. He wouldn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda. How so? Rabbi Yehuda lo savar like Rabbi Yosef ad kan lo kam Rabbi Yehuda ela be'eruvei chatzerot derabanan aval sukkah de'oraita lo. Because Rabbi Yehuda is only talking here about eruvei chatzerot. It's rabbinic. In a rabbinic law, Rabbi Yehuda is going to be lenient. But sukkah's de'oraita. There he might say if you have a gap of 3 tefachim on the bottom, it's no good. Velo Rabbi Yosef savar like Rabbi Yehuda kan lo kama Rabbi Yosef ela besukah disur asehu aval Shabbat disur sekilahu lo. And Rabbi Yosef also, when it comes to sukkah, what are you dealing with? A positive commandment. What's the worst that's going to happen if you're sitting in a sukkah that's not acceptable? You didn't fulfill a positive mitzvah. It's not a sin. It's an isur aseh. You neglected a positive. But here we're dealing with hilchot Shabbat. Hilchot Shabbat, it's isur sekilah. Even though this is only a rabbinic case of the chatzerot, still, it's hilchot Shabbat. It's very strict. So therefore, lo amar, you can't. Maybe he didn't say that. Ve'im tomar, and if you're going to tell me, oto maseh shenasa betzipori alpi manasa, lo alpi Rabbi Yosef. What about the case in Tzipori where they made walls that didn't reach the ground and it was considered valid? Wasn't that in accordance with Rabbi Yosef? And it was Hilchot Shabbat. Didn't Rabbi Yosef say that we apply this rule, that a wall is viewed as descending to the ground, no matter how much of a gap there is, even on Shabbat? Because in Tzipori they relied on this, and that was the place of Rabbi Yosef. He was from Tzipori? No, it wasn't. Lo al pi Rabbi Yosef. It wasn't according to Rabbi Yosef. El al pi Rabbi Ishmael but Rabbi Yosef. It was his son Rabbi Ishmael, the son of Rabbi Yosef, that allowed them to do that. What was this? Nasa. That was who it was done by. So Rabbi Yosef himself, maybe he didn't apply this leniency to Hilchot Shabbat. We don't know that he did. We only know that his son did. And how do we know that his son did? The Kiyata Rav Dimi Amar, because Rav Dimi came and told us. One time they forgot to bring a Sefer Torah to the synagogue before Shabbat. And what happened? The next day, what did they do? There were a bunch of pillars. There was like a 2 rows of pillars that went from wherever the Sefer Torah was to the synagogue. So they draped curtains or sheets over these pillars to make walls, and to make a corridor, basically, to make like a corridor that was enclosed on both sides, in between the 2 houses, and then they were able to carry. But these sadinim, these pieces of cloth or these blankets, they didn't reach the ground, these sheets. They didn't reach the ground. And yet they counted them as walls. So now, first the Gemara deals with another problem. It says, what? Paresu lechatchila, they actually went and draped these sheets on Shabbat? How's that possible? Is that allowed? You're not allowed to make an ohel arai. You're not allowed to make a structure on Shabbat, even if it's temporary. How can you make walls to enclose this area on Shabbat? Rather, what happened was that they found that there was an area that was enclosed, where there were amudim, there were columns that had sheets draped over them before Shabbat. And although the sheets didn't reach the ground, they were like walls that went all the way from the house where the Sefer Torah was to the synagogue, and so they were able to carry the Sefer Torah, even though these walls did not reach the ground. So we see that Rabbi Yosei's son was lenient about that. But Rabbi Yosei himself, we don't know that he was lenient about that. Maybe when it came to Hilchot Shabbat, he would be strict. And therefore we can't conclude that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei are agreeing here. Because it could be that Rabbi Yosei would not agree with Rabbi Yehuda to apply the rule to Hilchot Shabbat. And it could be that Rabbi Yehuda would not agree to Rabbi Yosei in a Deoraita, only in a Derabanan. Amar Rabba said, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya, Amru Davar Echad. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya said the same thing. How so? Rabbi Yehuda had Amaran. Rabbi Yehuda said what we already said, which is that if you have a cistern in between 2 chatzerot, then you don't need any kind of division in the cistern itself. The wall of the chatzer between the chatzerot is enough. What did Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya say? Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya Omer gezuz trashish ba 4 amot al 4 amot chokek ba daled al daled umimaleh. That if you have a board that is 4 amot by 4 amot, which means 24 tefachim by 24 tefachim, you can cut a hole in it that's 4 by 4 tefachim, and you can fill it water from the hole. In other words, you have, let's say, a board, you have a wall, next to the wall, right outside the wall is water. You're right on the water. Right below you is a body of water. So you have a plank, 4 amot by 4 amot, 24 tefachim by 24 tefachim, protruding from under your window, a ledge. What you can do is make a hole 4 by 4 tefachim in the middle of that ledge. It's still flat. But what do we say? We say that we look at, now what happens when you make that 4 by 4 tefach hole in the middle? You have 10 tefachim from the hole to each side. Okay, look at the picture on, hold on, I'll tell you. To get an idea what this looks like, the picture on page 298. So what happens is, you have, if you make 4 tefach by 4 tefach hole here, so what you end up having is, around the hole is 10 tefachim, north, south, east, and west, okay? Right, left, up, and down, you have along the plane you have 10 tefachim, because why? You erased 4 from this direction and 4 from this direction because you made a hole of 4 by 4. So you have 10, 10, 10, and 10. Because there was 24 tefachim in each direction. Now there's 10, 10 with a hole of 4 in the middle, 10 from the left to the right with a hole of, and then the hole, and then another 10. So what do we do then? We imagine as if these are folded downwards. These strips of 10 tefachim are folded downwards. And what would happen if you folded it downwards? Look at picture 299. It would make a shaft going down. 10 tefachim south, north, west, and east. So by making this hole of 4 by 4 tefachim in the center of this plank or board, what do you create? You create an imaginary shaft going down. You don't actually have to fold 10 tefachim on the right, 10 tefachim on the left, 10 tefachim on top, 10 tefachim on the bottom. You don't have to. You just imagine it. Okay? Now what do you see from there? You see that he has this idea of imaginary extension of walls downward. And what is Rabbi Yehuda saying? He's saying that the wall between the two chatzerot, we're imagining like it descends downward and divides the cistern into right and left. Same concept. Amar le Abaye said, Vidil Malohi. No, I say they don't agree. Again, same concept. Right? They don't agree. Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya does not agree with Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree with Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya. Why? Because Vidil Maloi Ad Kan Lo Kama Rabbi Yehuda Hatam Ela Amar Gud Achit Machitzta Aval Kof the Good Lo. Because Rabbi Yehuda is only saying good that we say the principle of Gud Achit Machitzta, which means we have a real wall. There's a real wall between the two chatzerot. What do? We extend it. We imagine that it extends all the way down. But to say we're going to imagine folding a flat board into 4 pieces that extend downward, that he's not going to say. Because this is a horizontal board. You're going to imagine that the pieces are now vertical, hanging down and making a shaft. That he's not going to say. And ve'ad kad lo kam Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya. Hatam ela b'yamashel Tiveria, and it could be that Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya is only saying there b'yamashel Tiveria, in the Sea of Tiberias of Tiberia. Why? Ho'il v'yesh lo oganim v'ayarot, because there is a high bank to the ocean there, to the sea, ve'ayarot ve'karpefot makifotota, and around the entire perimeter of that sea are houses, chatzerot, you have courtyards, you have, in other words, the perimeter is actually enclosed. It's actually enclosed by all of these different structures around the banks. So therefore, aval bishar memot lo ama lo, but in other water, bodies of water, he wouldn't say that. He wouldn't necessarily say that. Okay, so therefore so he's being lenient because it's the Sea of Tiberia. But maybe in another ocean, he wouldn't apply this idea. Now we're just going to finish this piece off to the Mishnah because it's an application of these same ideas and we won't have to rediscover the wheel tomorrow. Amar Abai says, Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya hayta smucha lekotel b'pachot b'gimel tfachim tzarich she'eh orka daled amot ve'rochba achad asar u'mashu. Hayta zekufa tzarich she'eh gova asara tfachim ve'rochba vav tfachim u'shnei mashuyin. So Abaye says that this concept of Rabbi Hananiah ben Akavya will be extended to other examples. So he gives us some instances of application. So for instance, if you had a wall, if this board were situated as it is in illustration number 300, so that there is actually a gap between, in other words, there are sticks jutting out of the wall, and this board is resting on sticks, and these sticks there's a space between the wall and the board of 3 tfachim. Or slightly less than 3 tfachim. So what do you do when there's a space of slightly less than 3 tfachim? So they make an indent in the board of just a little bit to make the hole. Because remember, before you had to make a hole in the middle of 4 by 4 tfachim. But here, the board is already almost 3 tfachim away from the wall. So all you have to do is make a little indent in the board here to complete the 4 by 4 tfachim, and you have already a 4 by 4 tfachim space. Okay? And now what do? We can use this piece over here, and this long piece over here as our folding pieces. So look what will happen. We fold down. So we use the real actual wall as one wall. Okay? We use the 10 tefachim length of the board. We fold that down as one wall. And then we fold down 1 tefach long on the right, 1 tefach long on the left, and they make an enclosure. Look, there's a shaft now. See the shaft that's created there? In illustration number 301. Now, do we really cut this? We're not really cutting it. It's imaginary. Second case, zikufa, Abaye says. Zikufa means if it was standing vertically against the wall. So if it's standing vertically against the wall, then it only has to be 10 tefachim in height, and 6 tefachim and 2 mashihuin in thickness. Why? Because then what do we say? We say that we imagine that these two extra tefachim on the side, in other words, the width of it is 6 and 2 mashahuyin. The mashahu is over here and the mashahu over here. So what do we do with it? We fold the tefach and mashahu over here and the tefach and mashahu over here. Okay? Leaving now 4 tefachim in the middle. Okay? And there's now a space from the wall. In other words, we fold these in and we imagine it looking like this. So what it looked like on the left in illustration number 302 is we imagine like the board that's flush against the wall, we imagine like it has legs. Okay? Because you bend the left side in, you bend the right side in. They make the little bends. In other words, the board is wall number 1, the bend on the left is wall number 2, the bend on the right is wall number 3, even though those 2 walls are only a tefach and a little bit more each, and the wall itself is wall number 4. Okay, so you end up having and of course it has to be less, you have to have the board standing up less than 4 tefachim from the wall, because if it's actually flush against the wall, then there's no space. There has to be at least a 4x4 tefach space in between this shaft to create an area. Okay? But the point is that it could just be, all you would have to do is put this flat wall within 4 tefachim, this flat board within 4 tefachim of the wall, and if you could bend in a tefach and a little bit on the left side, and a tefach and a little bit on the right side, and you would still have 4 tefachim in the middle of the board, then you would have an imaginary shaft. Okay, that's to allow them to draw water right against the wall.
In the previous case, 4x4, doesn't it create a new reshut?
Yeah, it does, but you're in a private domain because you're coming from the window, and it's a private domain. Okay, so then we have another 2 cases. Amar Ravuna Bereder Rav Yoshua, Rav Yudas in the name of Rav Yoshua, Hayta omedet bekeren zavit tzarich shegova yud tefachim v'rochba bet tefachim u'shnei mashuyin. So when it's in a corner of the wall, what do we do? So a corner of the wall, look, if it's in the corner, so what do you have? It's standing in a corner, so it's less than 4 tefachim from this wall. It's less than 3 tefachim from this wall. So what do? You end up using this wall as one wall because it's less than 3 tefachim from over here. This wall it's 4 tefachim from this wall, so that you have the air space in the middle. Okay, and we imagine folding this in to make this side. Okay, so what ends up happening is, Rashi explains it on the side, but basically the way that it works is you have already 2 actual walls, plus you have the wall of the wall of the board itself, and all you need to do is you need to fold in you need this to be 10 tefachim high, of course, and you need it to be only 2 tefachim in width. Why does it need to be only 2 tefachim in width? Because you need to fold in that 1 tefach and a little bit more to close off this space, so that it's within 3 tefachim of the wall over here, and what you end up having is you end up having an enclosure, even though this board is only 2.5 tefachim in width, because over here you're folding in one tefach and a little bit more. So now this space will be less than 3 tefachim, and you have a real wall here, a real wall here, and a real wall here. So you have 4x4 tefachim of airspace in the middle. That's because it's a corner piece, okay? That's because it's in the corner. So if you look at illustration 304, it shows you exactly what it would look like if you actually folded it. Okay, in illustration 304 on the next page. That's what it would actually look like if you actually folded it. But you don't actually have to fold it. You can just have the board of 10 tefachim in height and 2.5 tefachim in width standing there at the corner within 4 tefachim of one wall and within 3 tefachim of the other wall, and you're good. Okay? So that's the rule. Now, last question of the Gemara. Now, according to this, though, we have all these cases where, you're allowed to use a board that's only 6 tefachim in width. You're allowed to use a board that's, only 2.5 tefachim in width in this case. So what was the case that he was talking about where you needed to be 24 tefachim by 24 tefachim? Where is that case? The answer, he says, is that the case is the avida ki asita. When you make it like a mortar. What does making it like a mortar mean? It means like this. In other words, where this board is not near a wall, it's horizontal, not vertical, and it's on 4 pillars. Okay, it's resting like this. So that's the case where you need it to be 24 tefachim by 24 tefachim, because what are you going to do? You need to make the hole of 4 by 4 tefachim in the center, and then you need 10, 10, 10, and 10, north, south, east, and west, so that you can fold it down, as we saw already in illustration number 299. You fold it down and create a shaft that way. But whenever you have an actual structure that you can utilize as part of it, you need less width and less length in the board, because you can utilize the wall. I mean, the board always has to be 10 tefachim in length, but you can require less width in the board, because you're utilizing this existing structure to make parts of the wall. So you don't have to fold in as much of the board to make the wall, because you can just have it within a certain distance from the actual wall, and all it needs to fold in is a little bit to be able to create the shaft. So all of this is happening in imagination. None of this is happening for real. But the point is that he's allowing us to creatively, in our imagination, fold this board in various shapes in order to create a shaft, which will allow a person who's standing in a private domain to draw water on Shabbat that otherwise would be a karmelit, otherwise would be prohibited to be drawn, because he would be taking it from a forbidden domain into his domain. But we are very liberal and flexible with how we interpret a wall or a shaft in this case, and we enable him even not only to use a makeshift shaft, but actually even to take a flat board, make a hole in it, and pretend that there's a shaft descending. So that's how far Rabbi Hanan ben Akavya goes in his interpretation.